Hello? Okay. Hey. I think we are going to get started. My name is Cindy Buteau, and I am president of a company called Space Commerce Matters. And I'm here in person with Liz Seward. And she's going to introduce herself. We have two folks that are calling in. One, Monica Jan from Virgin Orbit in California. So I think it's 2 a.m. her time. And also Melissa Thorpe calling in from the Cornwall Spaceport. And so an apology for saying Liz's name wrong because she's a legend and an icon. I'm going to pass the baton to you so you can properly introduce yourself. Sorry about that, Liz.
Hi, it's nice to be here. I'm Liz Seward. I'm with BAE Systems, where I am head of strategy for space and helping BAE with their expansion of their space portfolio.
All right, thank you. And the point of this panel isn't necessarily to talk about women, even though we are all women participating on this panel. I'm actually looking out in the audience and I see two iconic women in space, Audrey and Marie-Laure from Kness and Metis. And the work that they're doing, I'm actually going to be talking about here in just a bit. So I think the point of this conversation is that we've been talking about space visionaries and the progress that's been made. We've been participating in Paris Space Week. We were in Monaco. And a lot of it was talking about projective, looking forward. And what we'd like to talk about today is, there's been real progress made, and we're going to talk about that today. So next slide, please. We're going to do it the old-fashioned way. When we talk about space, and all of you with the meetings that we're having today, we typically talk about the bridge between traditional space and non-traditional space. And one of the things we like to talk about is what happens when we all realize we have these tools based in space and the space phenomena to unlock these amazing innovations here on Earth. Next slide, please. We know that governments are continuing to focus on the moon, Mars, and exploration, and they're very supportive of promoting commercialization of low Earth orbit. Next slide, please. There has been a traditional focus on the supply side. So we are all hearing about these new space platforms, and during our talk today, we'll be even talking about, additional activity that's been taking place. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And Audrey and Marie-Laure, you know this slide well. The demand side of space is nascent, but we know it's growing, and we've seen tremendous progress. And with the initiatives that Metis and others are doing right now, we see this activity even growing more. And when we talk to non-traditional, or even here in this conference today, lots of platforms are being built where there's not necessarily an understanding or a connection to that ultimate end user customer. And when we went out and spoke to AstraZeneca or Target or Honeywell or Goodyear Tire, none of these non-traditional space entities thought space was relevant to them. They thought it was interesting, but they didn't think it was relevant to their business. And by the time we walked out of those meetings, we had tangible projects that you're seeing listed on this slide of these organizations doing work in space and actually paying for it. Next slide, please. Thank you. One of the most exciting things I think that we all talk about is we're not just looking at space commercially. We're actually going off our planet, and the last presentation was based on sustainability. We're going off our planet to solve major terrestrial problems. And it's amazing the suite of assets and tools in space to do this type of work that really exist. And we're seeing lots of funding and programming in these really important areas. One of the things that we're very proud of is we've done a lot of work related to what is the market value, the total addressable market associated with space-based activity? And what we have found is that we can project, and this is not, the value of the total drug market or the value of the total semiconductor market. We have attributed $885 billion associated with that activity that can be done in low Earth orbit using existing platforms or platforms that are just on the horizon. And so what this means is these are viable concerns. These are viable markets that actually can take place. And we're seeing accelerated activity in the life sciences of not just doing point solution R&D, which is very limited in terms of the addressable market perspective, but we're seeing trajectories and pathways to manufacturing. And what Audrey and Marie-Laure from Metis are really focused on is biomanufacturing and how do you unlock that throughout Europe. So the work they're doing is phenomenal. Next slide, thank you. The one thing that always amazes me, when you see what's the value of space, this came out from ESA just recently, where they talk about $270 billion or billion euro, or dollars in this case, in global revenue. That does not even touch the demand side of the equation, the $885 billion that we were just talking about. So what would happen if we actually think about space on the supply and the demand side, looking at all of these pieces together? The value of that market can only expand exponentially as a result of that. Next slide. And now is the time. Now, and this is the reason why we're here today to talk about the fact that it's not just in the future. There's real progress being made, and we're now at an inflection point. There are new facilities, new factories, new opportunity to create the assets in space, and they are being created that can carry out that manufacturing or that advanced research and development. And as we all know, the International Space Station, which has been that platform in low Earth orbit, was never designed to be a manufacturing platform. And now when we see Space Rider or Space Forge or Varda Space, you're seeing lots of these platform companies coming around, raising significant funding and putting in place that infrastructure that is that will be there very shortly to really support this activity. And that is the exciting part of all of this. Next slide. Even when we talk about ESA right now, with their focus on commercialization, the new Director General published commercialization as one of his top 5 priorities. And he said, if we don't achieve commercialization, the rest of my priorities won't succeed either. Geraldine Naha, who I think is here today, hopefully if you are Geraldine, you can put your hand up and introduce yourself, but she was appointed the new there was a whole new directorate focused on commercialization with Geraldine heading this up. The second point is the one that I was just referring to with the CNES Metis folks. ESA put in place right now 3 accelerators called Business and Space Growth Network, focused on commercialization in point areas. So biomanufacturing, and that hub is based out of France. There was a second one awarded, Sustainable Food and Agriculture, which was awarded to the Space Cooperative Europe, and Emmanuel Mondon is here from the SCE. So Emmanuel, I don't see you right away. And then Advanced Materials with the Satellite Application Catapult folks were awarded. And we see just many new sort of supportive efforts from government, and we see many new manufacturing facilities. We were just talking about this with the trade investment folks here from the UK. The UK just put in place a new strategy in 2021 with 5 primary goals. They're looking at really protecting their excellence where they are now and expanding that excellence. And with these types of strategy come real programmatic approaches to commercialization and to looking at these initiatives. So I love it when state or countries are visionary enough, and I'm going to be asking Liz just about this, especially with the UK, where she sees this strategy supporting. Next slide, please. And so ultimately, this is my last slide, and then we're hopefully going to have people on the phones also with Liz and myself. But the point is, progress has been made. Liz is going to talk a little bit about BAE Systems and their acquisition of in-space missions. And where's Doug? Doug, can you Doug right there is the CEO of in-space missions, and quite an exciting time for Doug and BAE Systems. Virgin Orbit and Space Cornwall with the activity, the announcements. There was a big announcement with Space Forge. And ultimately, what we're seeing is these large organizations merging with these other entities, and ultimately progress has been made. So I would like to just stop with just showing you PowerPoints, but can we just keep this up? And Liz, more in a conversational setting here, what has changed for you since the last Paris Space Week?
Thanks, Cindy. I mean, the big one is that I've joined BAE Systems, so I've swapped companies since the last Paris Space Week. And it's a hugely exciting time for the organisation. So we are all here because we know that space is the future and is growing and expanding and becoming ever more important. But so this knowledge is also now hitting all of the big players around the world. So BA itself has created a new division called the Digital Intelligence Division. It's merged its defence side along with its applied intelligence, and it's really bringing together the synergies of data and sort of use and access to data for its customers. So it's expanding into the space arena. It's done small things in space for 20 years, so it's not new, but it hasn't really had a focus until now. But since sort of 20 years has passed, the way that we do space has changed a lot. And so it's not going down the traditional route of the large-scale manufacturing. Oh, sorry about that. Are we all awake? It's not going down the traditional route of large-scale manufacturers. It's really looking to do things differently, to embrace the new space ethos, the agile working, and bring that to its customers. And so that's the reason that it's acquired in-space missions. And as Cindy pointed out, Doug is here. The stand is over on C06. So to find out in much more detail what's going on, please do go and talk to them and me, and I will be over there as well. But that's really a sign of how BAE is going to do it and move in this area, and I'm going to be helping them do it.
That's great. And one of the things that we showed was the UK putting in place a UK space strategy. Can you talk a little bit about where you see, not just from the UK perspective, but where you see space strategy? Your new title is an amazing title, looking at strategy not just for this one area, but globally. What do you see as that interconnection between when a country puts in place a space strategy and your work and your view from a strategic standpoint?
I think it's hugely important to have it written down, and that's the really great thing about the UK's National Space Strategy, and it also published more recently a Defence Space Strategy. The UK created its space agency, I think, close to 10 years ago now, but it's really bringing it to the forefront. It's showing how space is going to impact across all of government and across all of the country. And we now have something to work to, both the government, the companies, the institutions, that's much more joined up. The UK has it's actually put together the civil and defence strategy in one, which is quite new for us. And that's something that we're seeing all around the world, is this sort of harmonisation of the two and how civil and defence can work together. We've also seen in the UK, they've got a Space Directorate and a Space Command on the military side, and a whole new Space Directorate in one of our government departments on the civil side. So it's really, really coming to the forefront. And we're seeing that echoed around the world as well, so that we're seeing people work much better together.
Good. And let me just ask, do we have anybody that's called in, or is anybody, do we have Monica or Melissa? Either one of them? Are they online? Monica? Yeah. All right, hopefully Monica is coming in from Virgin Orbit. While we're waiting for Monica, let's get back to, sort of the where we see, progress being made. What do you see as changes in customer strategies? Since when did we do our first panel? In 2019, maybe? So what are some of these big changes with customer strategies you see?
I think we know a lot of them. We are definitely seeing that customers are less interested in the hardware and the technical side of space, and they're much more interested in what they can get out of it, what answers and insights can space deliver. As you said, the big companies like Target and Walmart, and you had some great ones on there, they have no interest in space itself, and they don't really think that it could benefit them until they learn what those insights are that they could gather. And in fact, they've probably been using space technology for quite some time without even realizing it. And so we're seeing this across traditional customers as well as new customers. And what does that mean for industry? Well, it means that we have to sort of respond to that. We have to be less space and more answers. And we have to give them the flexibility and things at speed. I'm going to do a plug for InSpace again and some of their products coming up. So you can now launch, not just with our company, but with many others as well, much smaller satellites into orbit, and you can launch just your payload on a system that somebody else has built. So the cost of getting into space is much easier, and the access of getting into space. But we also have a system coming up that's actually a reconfigurable digital payload. You can launch your RF payload on a satellite that already exists in orbit. So what we're talking about is having space-resident infrastructure that will actually let customers get something into space very fast, but not just for testing. We're not just talking about in-orbit demonstration here. We're talking about long-term use of space technology in a really fast way. And this is something that we're doing as an answer to those changing customer requirements.
Yeah, and I think that is something, I thought I saw Monica there for a minute, but I know Monica, Jan from Virgin Orbit, and Melissa, as we talked about this last time, we are really focused on putting the customer first and then coming back in, because when you're working in a traditional aerospace industry, you don't tend to think of that non-traditional, that ultimate end user that may not think they need space or could use space. But when you're able to translate those propositions into that customer language, then, and that is the reason we were able to get so many of those big Fortune 500 organizations to actually consider paying for activity in space. And I think with the advent on the supply side growing as it's been growing, and being able to meet the needs of the non-traditional space customer, we're going to actually move from, that word will be eliminated. There will be no such thing as a non-traditional space customer and a traditional aerospace customer. We're actually going to be talking about low Earth orbit as just a market, just like you would go to any market across this planet. You just happen to be going, a few hundred or thousand kilometers above our head, instead of, across the ocean. Is Monica here or Melissa? No? Do we have them? Well, why don't you put yourself in, we've done so many of these with Monica, why don't you put yourself in Monica's position right now? And, you know, what are you seeing with Virgin Orbit and with the Cornwall Spaceport and with a lot of these infrastructural elements? I mean, do you have any views on that, especially related to the strategy that you've been talking about?
So, I mean, I can talk as an excited UK citizen in that we are in 2022 and the first launch from UK soil is going to happen this year, and it is with Virgin Orbit and Cornwall Spaceport. So it's hugely exciting, and if we do get them online, I will have just stolen their thunder, so hopefully they'll forgive me for that. But we're certainly seeing small launch expanding, and this is part of the ease of getting into space and how we're seeing access to space becoming cheaper and easier and also more frequent. And that is going to be a huge benefit to the whole of the space industry. And one of the ways that the UK is supporting this is with its Launch UK programme, and the culmination of that, or the beginning really, the first big step is going to be that launch from the UK. So Cornwall Spaceport, which my mother lives just down the road from, so I'm really excited that it is in Cornwall, is going to be hosting Virgin Orbit's first rocket.
Yeah, that's very exciting. All right, well, as we're waiting for these technical issues, why don't I just open it up to you guys? Do you have any questions? And if you want to ask the question, because we did this when we were in Monaco, and we were, you know, a full panel in person there, and it just happened to be that we were women, all, you know, talking about leadership in space. But it ended up being, and I think, Doug, you were a big piece of that, turning into a very interesting conversation of the dynamics of why it's important to be thinking about, you know, sort of the differences between us as we're creating this really new, vibrant marketplace, and making sure that we're mentoring and we're bringing women along, and that we're inclusive to all types of individuals. So if you want to go into any of those discussion points, we can do it. Or if you want to ask questions on anything that we've talked about today, please ask a question, or not to put you on a spot here. Oh, Doug. Do you want to?
Yeah, I was just wondering, we've had the pandemic for the last 2 years. What's the impact of that been on the engagement of women in the space sector?
Why don't you answer?
I mean, I think that's a really good question, and I don't officially know the answer, but I have seen some benefits and some downsides. I think we've all been working at home, and we've all had to struggle with how do you connect with colleagues, and that's had an impact on everybody. But I think especially if you're new in a job, how do you connect with those people? But I will say that certainly my experience in some of the larger organisations is that they have finally embraced flexible working in a way that they really didn't before. And jobs that people said that you couldn't do part-time or you couldn't do in a flexible way, well, everybody has had to do it. People have had to homeschool, and everybody's been affected. So I'm quite hopeful that the pandemic has had a positive impact on the tools that we use to work and the way that we do that we can get more people and more women into the office with all of that flexibility. And Cindy, have you seen anything different in the US?
No, but I just got a message from Monica. So is she? I'm feeling bad that it's 2 a.m, probably now 3 a.m. her time. Is she on? No, she's not. Okay. Well, she sends her regards then. No? No, excellent answer. I have nothing to add to that. Does anybody else have a question? Oh, Audrey. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello again. As you mentioned before, we have now new opportunities from the space field for other markets, like, for instance, the health markets. What would be your recommendation to attract funding, especially from investors, from this field to the space field?
Great question. So what should we do to attract
Oops, yes. So thank you for the recap. We're just trying to fix the technical issues. So you said more funding from investors into space. I mean, we're definitely seeing an explosion in that already, which is fantastic. So the venture capital world has really latched onto space as a new growth area that it can invest in. And there are a variety of factors for this. One is that the timescales for space have come down a lot. So whereas a launch in the past to get your mission up would take 5 to 10 years, we can do it really fast. We'll be able to do it even faster soon. And so the investment timescales are less. And I think the other side is that the venture capitalists are less impatient than they used to be. And whereas they used to want to turn a company around in 3 years, invest, expand, get their money back, they're also willing to wait 5 years or more for the gains. So space is one of those new hot areas, which has been really great to see. I think education is probably the one thing we can do better for investors. They don't always understand space, so they don't really understand if the technology that somebody is presenting to them is viable or not. I have seen some investors get hugely excited by some technologies and the engineers just say, what? But then I've also seen it the other way around. You know, engineers are just so excited by something amazing and investors don't get it. So we as the experts in space, I think, have we have the ability to help educate some of those investors and to really help them understand what are going to be those new hot companies and what is a viable product and a viable company.
And just to let any investor know, in this whole conference, Audrey Berthier is the CEO of Medis, which is the life science arm associated with Kness, and really being the thought leader of the commercialization of biomanufacturing, along with Marie-Laure, and they are just doing tremendous work there. The other thing I would add to what Liz said is I think that, you know, it's not about going to the venture capital only. I think it's, you know, and I was talking with Doug about this earlier, it's looking at strategic partners in the life sciences area that actually understand the value of a better vaccine produced because you're doing it a different way in low Earth orbit. And now, in addition to going to non-traditional customers, you're going to non-traditional capital and sources of capital to support that. And I think we're going to see even more of that as we go forward. All right, Monica, I see your silhouette, but I don't know. No? Okay. Yeah, here we go. Another question? I don't know your name, so if you want to say.
Hi, Charlie Young. Just going on that point that you were making, Liz, there, about investment, I wonder whether there's also a responsibility on the industry to help investors understand the ethics of what they're getting involved in, because as new space expands, for me, the work that we do around safety engineering in the launch sector, we're already seeing compromises. I mean, we've seen, I think, both in Jeff Bezos' mission and also now in Virgin Galactic, they've compromised safety on vehicles that are carrying people. So we're already seeing the infiltration and the crossover between where investment is compromising safety. Smaller SMEs may well even just cut corners because they can afford to turn a blind eye to it. And I think that if you want legacy space engineers and technologists and leaders, I think we have some level of responsibility about leading by example and perhaps influencing in ways that that otherwise will be overlooked. And I just wonder what your views on that one is, because it's probably not an easy one to round off.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a very good point, a very interesting point. The old way of doing that was through ESA and ESA having standards, and as the huge number of new space companies are sort of being created and exploding, whose responsibility is it to police them and to have those standards? And you're right, I think investors are a key part of that, and investors should be the ones that are actually aware of the importance of safety and what their responsibilities are. I'm going to pause because I see Monica online.
Monica, can you hear us? First of all, what time is it there?
3:30, I think. I can hear you all along, but you can't hear me.
All right, Monica, why don't we wrap up this amazing panel with can you introduce yourself and give us your view on the progress made? We talked a little bit about the exciting announcement with the Cornwall Spaceport and the launch. Are you still there, Monica? All right, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, so why don't you give the Virgin Orbit perspective of the progress made, since we've been having these conversations, and maybe some of the new exciting announcements that you have coming.
Perfect. I hope this audio is still working.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, this is nodding, that's good. So my apologies, the audio was going in and out, so I missed the first part of your presentation. Cynthia, I can see your slide, which is amazing, and caught a little bit of the discussion for the second half. So I think I would just add on to what you ladies have already discussed. For us at Virgin Orbit, I guess the biggest news is that we have gone public since the last time we were at the conference. So that's quite exciting news for us. And along with that, it comes with quite a few changes, as you can imagine, going from a private to a public company. But that also allows us to really start executing for a lot of the vision that we have with the new funding. A big part of it is the global expansion plan, which we have putting more footprint around the global market. As you have already seen or probably heard that we are launching from Cornwall this year, and I think Liz mentioned that a little bit earlier. That's our first international spaceport location, and followed by that surely will be Japan. And there are also many other countries currently in discussion. I would say that some of the biggest changes that I've seen in the last year in particular would be an acceleration of the globalization of space. In the past I have talked about there's a lot of innovation, a lot of desire, and a lot of excitement around the globe about space. And I think in the last year I've seen that space fever accelerate in the form of more funding. Countries are publishing their own national strategy, for example. For the ones that have already published, they are working pretty diligently to mature their regulatory framework, for example. And some of those funding in the last year, not only were they available, but they were putting in more support system, which I think Cynthia mentioned some of the incubation, some of the leading countries are putting in, and the newer countries, they're really reaching out to some of the more developed space nations for collaboration and help. And we got contacted as well, both regarding potential collaboration in investment, incubation, as well as kind of just the development of ecosystem through the building of spaceport. So those are some of the interesting things I think that I've seen, and judging from some of the questions I came from your audience just earlier, I think there's more opportunity for investment. There are also more support for investment if you know how to find them um, through just kind of the network and the institutional. And I think the different levels of investment where you're seeing a lot more maturity and moving up in funding rounds on the institutional side, but you also see a lot more, I think, retail investors coming in, either through the participation of some of the space SPAC going public. Um, there's been so many in the last year and a half. Surprisingly, pandemic hasn't really tempered that upward trend much, if at all. So which is very, I guess it's very happy for us to see on the space industry because we continue to see that growth. And a lot of the startup 2 years ago are now launching hardware. They are raising follow-up funding rounds, and they are maturing their business cases, and especially for the companies has gone or going public, really now having the public pressure to show some of these business cases playing out. So I think those are all very exciting things for me to see, where I think space 10, 20 years ago were just, what we're seeing today was just a talk, it was a dream. Wouldn't it be great if we see that today we're seeing everything come to fruition. So those are some of the really, really exciting things that I'm seeing, and hope to continue to see that accelerated growth.
Thanks, Monica. So you talked a bit about the UK launch and the Japan launch. What's next for Virgin after that?
Oh man, more launches, more locations coming to another airport spaceport near you, I would say. But also, I think on Cynthia's last slide, thank you for capturing that so well. I mentioned a little bit about expansion. So not just footprint, but our mission and model is really trying to open access to space for everyone. For all the different countries that have the dreams to creating their own spaceport, to launch something to space from their home soil. But also, as you have seen the news, we started making more investments and creating partnerships. So really that expansion into the use case, the downstream applications. So naturally, partnering, instead of building everything from scratch on our own, we're really, it's not a new strategy. We have been speaking with many of the good partner satellite providers in the industry in the last couple of years. You just started seeing some of these coming into news today. So really trying to create those integration and partnerships, turnkey solutions to really accelerate the business case rather than just trying to create new technologies for ourselves on our own.
Excellent. And I wish you had been here this whole time able to talk, because those are really great insights, Monica. I think we are wrapping up this panel. Does anybody in the audience have a question for Monica before we go? No? You've stunned them into no questions. All right. Any last final comments?
A last question, Monica. Are there any really big differences you're seeing between the US and Europe at the minute, given that we're based in Paris? Or do you think that we're running in sort of similar alignment?
Oh, great question, Liz.
Sorry.
Sounding me. No, it's a great question. I think similarities. The excitement, the strategy maturing, the funding, the policy, regulatory framework, I think those are innovation. I think that trend, that push forward, I think across the board very similar to the US and Europe. Differences, I've seen, I think continue to see, perhaps culture perhaps is different phasing and maturity level. I think early stage investment, the overall attitude from early stage investor from Europe versus Silicon Valley, which we quote unquote traditional Silicon Valley, I think that's remains slightly different. I've always seen that Silicon Valley, US early stage angel investors or VC, they tend to, I think the way they structure their deals are still slightly different. I would say more risk tolerant. Where versus I've seen not just Europe, but especially in Asia, you started to see, I think it's a little more conservative, a little less risk tolerant, just slightly less, not a drastic, I think, compared to Asia, which is much, much more conservative. And I think that might have something tied more to culture and how risk capital is traditionally been deployed and structured. The packages, for example, stock options or equity, leverage on debt, I think those are slightly different from what I've seen, maybe just the sample set that I've seen. And I think for space today, I'm hoping to see a little more embracing on the risk side, because some of these early stage companies need it, and I think it's a much, much more favorable environment for them today if they can get that support.
Yeah, would definitely agree with that. And especially the positive point on partnership. The BAE tagline is strength through partnership when it comes to space. So yeah, looking forward to working lots together.
All right. Well, Liz, thank you. Monica, thank you. A virtual thank you to Melissa, who probably is in the ether somewhere trying to also talk with us. But hopefully this discussion today was interesting in terms of all of the progress that's been made, as we've been having these same discussions. And I do think we are at an inflection point and we're seeing amazing things. So again, thank you, ladies. Please go to bed. I hope you don't have to get up early for a meeting, Monica, and hope to see you soon. All right. Thank
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you very much.